Hey everyone, welcome back to Why This Beer, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories behind your favorite brews. I'm Darren Binema, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Aslan Graves. Today, we chat with Thom Riley from Vancouver Island Brewing. Thom has a fascinating background from studying astrophysics in Scotland to working with major breweries like Stanley Brewing and Labatts, before finding his way back into the craft beer scene at Vancouver Island Brewing. We cover his passion for British rock music and how it's inspired some unique song-titled beers, the annual release of the Vancouver Island Brewing Hermannator Ice Bock, the challenges of brewing new styles on an older brewhouse, and his dedication to perfecting their core lineup. And just as an aside, this episode was recorded ahead of time, so we don't discuss Vancouver Island Brewing's recent announcement that they are ceasing operations at their current location as of November and shifting production to Phillips Brewing in Victoria. But we're confident that the transition will go smoothly under Thom's guidance. There's still plenty to enjoy as we take a deep dive into the history and craft of the Islander Lager, one of Vancouver Island Brewing's classic beers. So grab a pint, sit back, and enjoy our chat with Thom Riley. Cheers.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Why This Beer. Today we've got Thom Riley, General Manager of Vancouver Island Brewing, and of course, Darren,
Hey.
Jack of all trades at Neighborhood Brewing.
That's right. Yeah, welcome to the show, Thom.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's kick it off. GM at VIB, that's a pretty big role. Let's start at the beginning. What was your journey in brewing? Was that in Vancouver or?
Yeah, it's a weird one, and I feel like, you guys will probably say the same thing. I think we all end up here via some odd path. I don't know if anyone dreams of being a brewer in their childhood years, but yeah, I'm originally from Scotland, so I've been in Canada now for, I lose count now, I think it's 11 years, maybe 12, and in brewing for most of that time. So I graduated from Edinburgh University with a degree in astrophysics, so there's like my weird path, like I have a degree in astrophysics, but nobody knows why, and I don't even really know why. Like it was came out of a school system where it was like, you go to university, that's how you get a job. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. And what do I go do? They like, just pick something you like. I'm like, I kind of like
rocket
physics.
Scientist.
Space seems cool. So I tumbled into that, and I always make the joke. I don't know if my parents like this joke, but I always make the joke that the only thing I learned from my degree is that I didn't want to be an astrophysicist. So that was 4 years of my life well spent. But yeah, I met my my now wife through university. We met in our first year, and kind of towards the end of university, both of us were kind of not really super sure of where we wanted to go in life. And the jobs market in Scotland at the time was kind of slow, and there wasn't a lot going on. So we're like, why don't we just go travel for a year? And started looking into visas and things. So like, hey, you can just go to Canada as a young person for a year and travel and work and do that. So yeah, we signed up for that visa. We came over here, and through university, I'd really gotten into craft beer through, I'm going to say it out loud, I know it's kind of uncouth these days, but I was really like Brewdog were coming up at the time, and they were massive, and they were expanding, and at the time they had 1, 2, 3 bars, and they were kind of bringing that whole like American craft beer scene to the UK, where like traditionally, like as a young person, like ales were stuffy and just like it wasn't cool to drink old man beer and whatever. And Brewdog were really the ones. They weren't the only ones. There was a lot of other stuff going on and kind of more bubbled up around it that actually arguably was a lot better, just not as obnoxious. So we started getting into craft beer, but it's
what was the first Brewdog beer you had?
That's a great question. I think
like Punk IPA.
Yeah, Punk IPA is the only one I could think of.
I kind of remember it well, and it's an odd one because we were in, I can't remember the name of the bar, but I was to add to my nerdy background of being an astrophysicist. I was also really into photography when I was in university, and I was part of a photographic society, and we were at a bar one night, and a guy who, he's actually a brewer now too, funnily enough, but he was super into photography too. He was like, man, have you heard of this brewery, Brewdog? They're up in Fraserburgh, and they make these like crazy beers, and they've got this big stout aged in whiskey barrels. It's amazing. They have it. We should try one. And it was like 14 pounds. I'm like, what the hell, man? I can't afford that. He's like, split it with me. It's great. So I did, and we tried it, and it was like this crazy big, like, double digit imperial stout aged in Isla casks, and it was just like, doesn't even make sense. Like, this is beer. This is crazy. This is super cool. And then around that same time, they opened the bar in Edinburgh, and that just led to me basically blowing all of my student loan on trying beers from not just Brewdog.
Investing. You're investing.
Yeah, investing in my education. That's right. And like they would bring, early days of Brewdog, they were doing like a really great job of bringing a lot of US craft to the UK, and they were bringing it like legit reefered containers. Like we were getting like Stone and Joy by when it was first coming out, like fresh in Scotland, and trying those beers. And it was expensive, but it was cool, and it felt like you were kind of riding that wave of what was going on in the US. So through all of that, like got into craft beer, wasted a lot of money, or invested a lot of money, I guess, and but got to a point where I was like, okay, I legitimately can't afford this. Like, I'm at a supermarket trying to buy like the packet cheese and bread, and I don't have enough money in my account, so I just have to take the bread. And you're like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. So me and a buddy, and I remember it well, we were in a quantum physics lecture, and we were like, do you think you can just like make your own beer? And he starts like Googling it, and he finds there's a homebrew store in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And we're like, man, that's cool. He's like, yeah, you can buy like a starter kit for 40 pounds or whatever it was. I'm like, sweet. You want to just go do that instead? He's like, yeah, we literally just like got them left. And we bought a homebrew kit that day, and, you know, went on the usual homebrewing journey of making some pretty gross stuff, exploding bottles in airing closets and staining carpets of rental flats and all the rest of it. And
how many stoves do you think you wrecked, like boiling 20 liters?
A lot for sure. And no one would ever stand and be like, why did you have such a big pot on the stove? Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about
it. Trying to hit a rolling boil of 20 liters with a coil element.
Well, and it was just never good, right? Because you're waiting for it to come to a boil, and the natural thing to do is to have a few beers, and then it's like Tuesday afternoon, you're supposed to be studying, you've now got a pot boiling, you're 3 beers deep, and you're like, okay, well, let's see how this plays out. But
super safe.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess with time, just, you know, like I think all of us, you get hooked on the process, and you slowly start to make, like, you make something, you're like, wow, this is actually kind of good, and then you get better and better, and you start to just develop, I guess, a passion for it that you kind of don't shake off, I guess. 14, 15 years later at this point. And when we graduated, we decided we were going to come over to Vancouver. The original plan was 6 months in Vancouver, travel across the country, 6 months in Toronto. I don't know how we thought that was going to work, but because we're only here for a year, and then fly home, and that would be the end of that. But we came to Vancouver, and like it does with so many people, it just kind of sucked us in. And I got lucky at the time that I met Don Farian, who was opening, or going to be opening, Bomber at the time. And he was running Incendio in Gastown and the Beer Craft restaurant. So I remember it vividly. I came home from a shitty day. Oh, I'm not meant to swear, sorry. I'm
Light
Scottish,
swearing is
so
okay.
It's tough. Exactly. And I just had a crummy day at work, and was just applying for restaurant jobs, because that's all I was really planning to do in that year, was just do kind of casual work and just have some fun. And then went to interview with Donnie and his wife Christine, who was managing Incendio at the time, and interviewed for the job at Incendio. And within kind of a minute, he was like, okay, you've got that job, don't worry about that. It's like, so I'm opening a brewery in January. Would you be interested in coming and working at a brewery? Because I had stuff about my homebrew experience kind of on my resume, and kind of my passion for beer, and that was their whole thing. Like, Donnie's restaurants were very beer centric. So that's why I put that stuff in, not because I thought I was landing a job at brewery. And then kind of one thing led to another. I was one of the first employees at Bomber, and just kind of right around 2014. So kind of when it was all taking off. Taking off in East Van again, and we were kind of one of the earlier breweries in that kind of wave. And it kind of.
So you were there day one with Blair, eh?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think
brewing up some ESB.
Yep, that's one was ESB. And it's kind of crazy. Like we had Shirley Warren, who she's at Angry Hen now, but she was from Steamworks. She was a consultant on the project, and totally. All of our equipment had come from China. I don't think it was actually supposed to have, but there was anyway. The equipment was not in ideal state when it arrived, and I just remember those early days of Shirley just like hands in her hair, just like, what is this? Why is it piped this way? It doesn't make any sense. And it was a lot of fun. It's not necessarily the traditional way, I guess, to come up, and I think it's great now that brewing's become a little bit more, I guess, of a little bit of a trade. Like people go to school and kind of learn before they get thrown on a brew house. But
sometimes
it's fun.
Yeah.
It's.
Do you remember a beer you brewed at Bomber Up the Bracket?
I do. Up the Bracket IPA.
Yeah. What made that unique? Was that a test batch?
Yeah, we did that as a pilot batch on so we had the Sabco there, and it's funny too because like I always look back fondly on those days because like we were just making, it was the early days of craft, and like I talked to other people about this. It's like, do you remember when our only problem was we couldn't make enough? And it was just keep filling the tanks. We couldn't keep up, and that was the only thing. And you made it and it sold, and you could do one-offs and not worry about it. And maybe I'm just used to being at breweries where our tanks are way too big for that nowadays. But like, it was a fun time. Like you put things out and people want to try them. And anyway, Up the Bracket was inspired by one of my favorite bands from the UK. A lot of beer I make is named after bands or songs, and then
it's a good thing to get up from.
Well, and it's funny too because Stanley Park like weirdly latched on to certain names and like actually released them, and I'm like, you realize you just named a beer shadow play after a Joy Division song? Like, they're like, well, no, we're gonna make this whole story, and I'm like, yeah, okay, fine, whatever. Do what you're gonna do. I'm like, in my mind, it will always be named after a Joy Division song. So.
There you go.
But well, up the Bracket's an old English term for punch to the throat. So the whole thing it was a really big IPA with big bitterness, old school West Coast punch to the throat style beer.
Yeah.
Big hops.
Yep.
Nice.
Like how many sea hops?
It was all sea hops for sure.
Yeah.
And I think like we thought it was like mind blowing because it had Simcoe in it. It was like, man, this is cool.
pretty wild. Yeah.
Heck yeah. Yeah. So you're a pretty big music guy?
Yeah, for sure.
You draw inspiration from that?
Yeah, definitely. Like I played in bands when I was a kid, and definitely like in another life would have liked to have maybe pursued music in a bigger way, but I don't know. I find, again, in beer, there's lots of musicians that seem to transition into beer for whatever reason.
Yeah. When you're crunching it out, like what are you putting on?
I listen to a lot of like British indie rock. I'd say like shamelessly, like I consistently say there's not really a number that I could put on it and say I wouldn't pay it to go and see Oasis, the original lineup. Play in Manchester.
Impossible now, I think. But
well, he came out the other day and said he'd be willing to allow them to use a hologram of him, like that ABBA show that just happened. So we're getting close. Like he's at least willing to have his face next to Liam's again. So like the dream's still alive somewhat.
Yeah. Blair was saying that you guys used to crush out the Blue Album over crossovers on brews.
Yeah, Blue Album, Weezer was our cleanup album, we used to call it. And it's funny, too, because the current head brewer at VIB, we have very different tastes in music. Like, he's really into a lot of kind of metal and Euro metal and stuff like that. Apart from the Blue Album, he just loves the Blue Album, and he plays it all the time at the brewery. So it constantly triggers that memory. I'm like, good times.
That's fun. Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun when you can have like those moments, like you're just like, sometimes you need that on your day. Like, okay, let's put this thing on. It'll get everyone going. Like sometimes on Fridays, we'll just like put on Venga Boys playlist and it's just like party beats just to get you through the last like hour on the county line or something like that. Just like, okay,
For sure.
let's get it done.
Yeah. That's great. Got to keep morale high.
So after Bomber, what was your like next step in your brewing journey? I know you were working at some, like you mentioned, Stanley Park. What kind of got you in the door there, and how did that Stanley Park Labatts journey into the bigger beer world go? I guess
I went via Steamworks. Was my interim, and the way that all kind of came about was towards the end of my time at Bomber. I started studying for the IBD diploma in brewing because I just kind of wanted to go and do that education piece. So I think it would have been, I think I sat my first exam while I was at Bomber, or maybe just after I left Bomber. But when I started studying for that, you start to read about all this stuff, like, bigger breweries, automation, 4-vessel brew houses, and all the rest of it. And a buddy texted me, Alex Leckie, who you probably both know, and was asking me about someone who had applied for a job at Steamworks, and I knew the guy. I can't remember who it was, but he's like, "Oh, do you know this guy? Like, what do you think of him?" And I was like, "Why are you guys hiring?" And he's like, "Why are you interested?" I'm like, "Maybe."
Yeah.
And anyway, so ended up interviewing with Julia and kind of got given a chance to go over there, and was there for, I think, just over a year, and it was a really, really fun time. Like, it was right around the time they were adding 7 more outdoor tanks. We added another bright tank. They were adding the new can line. So it was just like crazy expansion mode going on around you, and crazy growth going on. And, moving from, I think we were doing 3 brews and we moved to 4 a day. So we expanded like the length of the shifts and all the rest of it. And to be honest, like I don't know if I was necessarily ready to leave Steamworks when I did. I was still really enjoying it. I loved working with Julia. I loved the team there. It was an exciting environment. But the Stanley Park thing came around. Actually, funnily enough, I was home visiting family, and I was in a Brewdog bar at the time. I actually remember this. And a recruiter reached out on LinkedIn and was like, "We have this role at Stanley Park. Like, would you be interested in interviewing for it?" And it's funny because I'd had recruiters reach out about Turning Point in the past for brewer roles, and I was always like, I don't really want to go and work in Delta. Like, I was younger at the time. It didn't really appeal. But the idea of like Brewmaster, Stanley Park, Labatt, I was like, this could be a cool learning opportunity. So I kind of went through the process and applied and went through rounds of interviews, and it's probably the most intense interview process I've ever been through, because like with Bomber and with Steamworks, it was kind of like one interview and you're in, and this was like 4 rounds of interviews, and it was all, essentially leading to the brew pub being open, and then wanting someone to kind of to front that. But somehow I made it through it all, and I got offered the job and was like, I don't know, learning opportunity. I know it's always tough. Like, I feel like there's this, there's always been the craft and big beer
battle.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it weird to talk about now as someone who was under that umbrella for 5 years. Like, I don't have any like hatred there or issue there. I think people worry too much about what big beer thinks of craft and should spend more time worrying about what they're doing themselves.
It's like the old adage, just like, they don't hate you, they just don't even think about you at all.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's cute. It's cute that cute you think that they care, because I just don't think they. I mean, they care to an extent. Like, they're obviously always watching.
Maybe, but a little bit.
Yeah, they're watching what's going on, but like at the same time, like they do the thing that they do really well, and we all do the thing that we do really well, and it's kind of.
Were you involved in the build out of the brew pub? there, like for the
in the latter
commissioning the brew
stages.
house?
Yeah, so I commissioned all the equipment. I wasn't unfortunately involved in the design process, and I only say that because it would have been cool to be a part of it, just because it was a neat layout. Like, I don't know if you guys have been in there, but the way they did it is it's like 3 separate cellars that kind of 2 are on one floor and 1 is in the basement, and it's all connected via hard piping.
Oh yeah.
Oh, crazy. Yeah,
It's kind of like
super cool.
Some European places do that, where they just like separate it all, and it's really makes it all look really clean.
Yeah.
To work in, which is really nice.
Yeah, and they spent a ton of money doing it, and like the guy who led the design and the procurement of the equipment and all the rest of it, like he did a really great job. Like, it's one of the nicest places to brew that I've ever brewed. Like, especially if you're doing like creative brewing. Like, it was a 5-hec 3-vessel system, with 15 FEs that essentially they could all be used as bright tanks as well, all single brew. And the neat thing was that like you were turning, especially in summer, like say we kegged 500 liters of sour, we could blow through that in 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
So like the opportunity to just like constantly try new stuff and experimenting was really cool. Like, it was super neat.
Yeah, I was looking at some YouTube videos just like in prep, and saw like some of the videos of the brewery there at Stanley Park. I was like, wow, I didn't realize like it was like fully automated kind of, or at least semi-automated. It looks somewhat automated brew house, which you don't always see at like a 5 hectoliter scale, obviously, too, especially around.
Yeah, it's funny.
BC,
I remember talking,
right? Like,
well, so the guy who did all the design, like, he was used to working in bigger plants and stuff, and I'm like, man, really went to town on this. Like, I can open valves with my hands. I didn't need it all to be pneumatic controlled from HMI. Yeah. He's like, well, it's just safer this way. I'm like, okay, it's fine.
True.
Which is, I mean, it's cool. It's
with those things in place, was it easier? Like, were recipes designed to scale, or was it more just like accessories to easier?
I mean, scaling's always a funny one. Like, I've done a lot of it, going from that brew house, which was essentially, call it 6-hec cast, up to the 100 hectoliter 5-vessel system that was at Turning Point.
Yeah.
Scaling's tricky. There's so much to it, right? Like, there's just, and to be honest, like the thing I learned the most, I think, from my time at Labatts was really that translation of recipe between systems and what the real important factors are. Like, I learned all sorts of metrics that I'd never even heard of before, and like the things that I don't even think I remember reading about when I was studying for IBD. Just like, even like the time at which you pitch the yeast, and how much air contact the yeast has, because like most smaller brewers, you're doing a single cast out into a tank, maybe 2, but like at Turning Point, we were doing 8 turns to fill a tank.
Right.
If you pitch on brew 1, by the time you're pitching brew 8, like fermentation's well underway, and now you're just creating all this weird, taking it anaerobic, aerobic back and forth, and it does nothing good for anything. So that was interesting to then understand that like when I scale it, it's going to experience different amounts of contact with air. So it's like, okay, well, if I'm doing single batches of the brew house, how can I replicate that by doing like additional air 3 hours after, so that it replicates what's going to happen on the big scale.
Right.
But then tank geometries and stuff, like
hydrostatic pressure.
Yeah, like it's, because that's crazy too. Like it blew my mind. Like, some of the biggest issues we would have at Turning Point was just like hydrostatic pressure and ale yeast. Like, it's just, ale yeast isn't built to deal with hydrostatic pressure.
Yeah.
Right?
To
like,
be open.
think about traditional ale fermentations, there was no hydrostatic pressure. So I mean, there was hydrostatic pressure, but there was no additional pressure from you know.
I mean, I guess that's why Bergman systems existed, is just to have like multiple small fermentation vessels.
Yeah, and keep that
Yeah.
height of the fermenter low.
Yeah. For those playing at home that don't know what hydrostatic pressure is, it's just like the pressure that the liquid, I guess, pushes. The top of the liquid will push down on the bottom of the tank, the liquid at the bottom of the tank, because of gravity. And so that pressure will can affect how yeast behaves, because generally speaking, yeast doesn't like pressure, especially ale yeast. Some like lager yeasts can handle pressure better, but generally, like, yes, like you're saying, English ale yeast, not a fan. Belgian yeast, notoriously not a fan as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's interesting. What other factors did you find was difficult when scaling up, or like, did you have to ever go from, okay, we're brewing this at this location, how can we brew this at another Labatts location? Or does that happen? Not so much.
Not for Stanley Park a whole bunch. Like, it's pretty much all made and produced in-house. So really it was mostly just going from the brew pub to the bigger system. And yeah, I'm trying to think, like, the other things that would, I mean, boil dynamics is always tough, and then length of whirlpool is another one. Just hot
Right.
utilization in general is kind of a bit of a mess when you try and compare the two, because like typically on a small scale, you know, if you want to, you can make your cast out happen in 10 minutes or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. But at the bigger brewery, like, it was pretty standard that it was more like 40 minutes.
Yeah.
So even though we could cast out faster, part of it was like, okay, well, we need to slow it down to replicate what's actually going to happen when we
Right.
Yeah.
put it onto the big system. And then it's also like making sure that the airflow rate is matching in terms of like flow of liquid, flow of air, and those dynamics. I mean, there's so many things you just can't control that, you know, you do your best to get it as close as you can, but there's always going to be aspects that are just hard to.
I'm sure to a certain extent too, it's like working within your restrictions, and sometimes you come across a happy accident where you're like, holy shit, like, this beer at like 100 hex tastes way better than the like proof of concepts we were making.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, it would go both ways for sure. Where there was sometimes on the pilot scale where we knew it was never going to be as good on the pilot scale as it would be when we scaled it. Just certain aspects, like the brew house at Turning Point, it was just like designed to brew lagers. Like, it was like a 5% lager machine. Like, that is what it did well. But then the brew house that we had at the brew pub, I always used to joke, like, the way it was designed was to fit in a space, but like, it had a mash mixer and then a lauter tun and then a boil kettle combined with whirlpool. But the lauter tun was just like a tall vessel with no rakes. I'm like, it's just another mash tun.
That's called craft. That's craft lauter tun.
Except I've beaten all of the air out of it that would have helped it float in a traditional mash tun. Now it's in this lauter tun and there's no rakes to cut it. No. It's like a Home Depot cooler because it's like really tall and thin, and you're like, okay, well, this is, and 100%, it's like, oh, that's craft for you. Whereas like the German brew house, it's like, I mean, anytime you deal with German manufacturers, it's like, well, can I put more in here? They're like, you could, but it would be wrong. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just, can I make 7% in beer? You could try, but you'd be wrong. It's okay, well, I'm not buying a whole new brew house, so we got to figure it out.
We only made this for Helles. If you want to make Bock beer, you got to get a different system. Yeah.
You never said you were going to make IPAs when you bought this brew house, so.
I haven't met one brew house that's good at making IPAs yet, so.
IPAs are tough, for
They're always going to be low efficiency. So then from Labatts to VIB, is that the next step from one to now a smaller craft brewery?
Yeah, and I guess like when I went to Labatt, it was kind of like an observation that anyone who got into positions that, like at the bigger breweries, like, you know, Julie at Steamworks, Justin at Red Truck, I was like, these guys all came from Molson or Labatt, and you know, that's how they were making those jumps. So I don't know, I'm just always I look at things very, I guess, black and white. I'm like, I guess that's what I got to go do. Just go work there, and then maybe I can. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, honestly, it was an amazing learning experience. And like, truthfully, there's a world in which I would have probably stayed there for the rest of my life. But, you know, opportunities come up, and we had our daughter 2.5 years ago, and we've always loved the idea of moving to the island. Like, we're obviously from the UK, and there's a lot of similarities between Victoria and the UK, I think more so than with Vancouver. And we grew up in smaller cities too. Like, I spent most of my life growing up in a small town in the north of Scotland, and then, you know, moved to Edinburgh, which is like the big city, but it's 500,000 people. Like, it's not anywhere close to the size of Vancouver. So the longer and longer we were in Vancouver, it just got bigger and bigger, as we all know. The story's been told, but it just got to a point, and then once we had our kid, we were kind of like, it'd be nice to be somewhere smaller, and we looked at all sorts of options, like even options to stay with Labatt and move elsewhere, but this job came up, and I kind of there's kind of like a do or die moment. It's like, let's go see what the island's like. We've always wanted to live there, and this is an opportunity. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But yeah,
you're back to the island in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's just a different island.
Yeah.
And with joining VIB, like, you're coming at a pretty cool time. They got it's a 40-year anniversary.
Yes, I noticed you're drinking from the mug there too. So we got our, I don't know if I can show that. Cheers to 40 years.
Cheers.
Heck yeah. But yeah, that's a pretty huge time to be there. Like, and that's one of the oldest craft breweries.
That's mind-boggling old
in BC. Let alone the West Coast.
Well, and it's crazy too because we have a lot of long-serving employees. Our quality manager has been with the company for 35 years. So he actually started in the original location. So we used to be in Saanich, I think near Keaton Cross somewhere. And that's where the brewery started. And then basically, I think they moved to the current location kind of like early 90s, something like that. So we've been in the current building for 24 years or whatever it is.
Yeah. And it's another classic German brew house as well, right?
Well, yeah. And that's a whole other, like, you want to talk about crazy brew houses. It's like, it's a 120 hectare brew house. Like, it's a 3-vessel, 120 hectare brew house that they bought used at the time from a brewery that was shutting down in Germany. So the brew house is even older than the brewery is. Like, the brew house is, I don't even know it's pieced together too. And like, if you ever see it, there's like all these controls on the wall, and none of it's real because it's all tied to a PLC now, which is also old. It's like an OG PLC and like definitely outdated. But the crazy thing is, like, at the time, like, I guess they were growing and they were just like, we just wanted to buy like the biggest brew house that we could as a smaller brewery, and like it didn't really exist. Like, that was small. Like, it was, to get like a proper brew house, you had to kind of make that jump to that size. So the crazy thing is, we have a 3-vessel, 120 hectoliter brew house and all single brew tanks, which I don't think I've ever seen. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a 100 hect brew house plus and all single brew tanks. Like, to me, once you make that jump to 100 hect, you're getting
get the outside tanks.
Yeah, exactly. You're putting the outside tanks in, exactly. So it's kind of neat that way. Like, it's and then we've got tanks in the building that are from the original sites. We've got tanks that are date stamped, like 1984. Cool. Original tanks from the year the brewery was started. So
wow.
And so before I take my last sip here, Islander Lager, like, that's, how long has that been brewed?
We were talking about this recently because
that's one of the longest brand.
Yeah, legacy, kind of. Like, we've been brewing it for, I think, about 20 years, so not since the brewery started, but they've had different iterations along the way, and like things that maybe you guys would know because you've grown up here, but Key Lager, I guess, was one back in the day. That they made. Islander's been around since about 20 years ago, and traditionally the old school branding was very like, kind of looked like kokanee, like it was kind of playing in that same kind of value space. And as the breweries kind of morphed and changed over time, Islander kind of just always stuck around in the portfolio, not always playing a leading role, and just kind of bubbled up here and there. And then I would say in the last few years, we've put kind of a real renewed focus behind both, selling it, but then also like the actual quality of the beer, and kind of leaning into what our brewery can do well. Like, we've done a lot of cool stuff. We've experimented a lot. We had the title series, which, we're not really doing that so much anymore because as much fun as it is, it's hard to sell those volumes.
Yeah.
when you're making 120 hectoliter batches of a pineapple IPA or something weird, right? And like I think
put it in a mix back and keep it fresh.
Yeah, and like that's
Yeah,
the thing.
yeah.
It's like you want it to be good. Like
Yeah.
you can do these things, but then it's like, okay, well, it takes us 6-7 months to sell it, and it's like, well, that's not a great experience. So
Yeah.
for anybody.
I mean,
so
Yeah.
this is great. It's got a nice like slight honey sweetness, like malt forward. There's like not too much.
Look at that.
Yeah, that's
Crystal clear.
Yeah,
and it's cool too. Like it's centrifuge only. We rack it into conditioning tanks, so it's another odd thing. I say odd thing. It's really normal in I guess traditional breweries and even like a lot of the North American like macro lager breweries. But we ferment in cylinder conicals and then we transfer it to dish bottoms for conditioning, and then we blend 2 batches to condition.
Right.
And I find like tasting it off the fermenter, it's always it gets really clean about day 7, but there's still that kind of little bit of sulfur snap there, and then post transfer you really knock that sulfur edge off, and it's just there enough to be interesting, but not
yeah.
so much so that it's like a.
Do you think in the
sulfur bomb,
transfer you're scrubbing it in a way, like having
I
that
think
extra
so.
transfer?
Like I think just the transfer, like just it's so interesting to taste the beer pre and post. Like it always just.
You mean transferring it to the conditioning tank, like blending them? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Just that transfer and the off gassing, I guess, as you fill that tank. Like it's super interesting to see how it kind of changes, and then we condition it for typically 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how long it ends up being in the fermenter.
Yeah.
And then straight to centrifuge, and we get really nice, bright, brilliant beer. Like it's great. I'm so glad filtering is a thing of the past.
I know that's that is a great thing. What's the base malt in this? Do you guys use like you guys must get it by like the boatload, maybe literally, but
yeah,
like
what it comes on a boat.
There you go.
It's Superior Pills, so it's Canada Malt Superior Pills. Yeah, we do it silo, and then we add a little bit of German Vienna in there just to kind of bring that kind of, I guess, interest to the malt profile, and that sweetness and that kind of honey note that you're alluding to, which I think just helps to round it out a little bit. And I don't know, I really like it. I think it's a great beer. Like it's got that all malt flavor, which you don't always get from a lot of people when they make beers like this. They go down that route of starting to add corn and rice, which I think can have its place, but like I still really enjoy a 5% beer that is all malt, which is and then in that space getting harder to find. I
like the hop character is really nice in a way that like I find it an interesting beer to drink. But it's also not like, it's really balanced well, where like there's this nice like hop note at the end. I'm like, oh, this is good, and it's got this like, I don't even know what kind of, I don't know. It's got this traditional thing. It's subtle, grassy, but it's not like too intense in any way. Where like I feel like anyone would like it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing we're going for. Like we don't want it to cross the line into being like overly interesting is the wrong term, but like that you have to think too much about it. But we want it still to be something there for you to find if you want to think about it.
I like to tell people with our like lager at Main Street, I'm like, it's the beer I think about all the time, so nobody else has to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's totally it. It's like we put a lot of effort into it, and like we worry about weird things when it comes to Islander, which I enjoy. Like I feel like with IPAs, the point you made, you're always so stressed out about yield that you don't have time to think about anything else.
Yeah.
Which is whereas with Islander, we get way more into the minutia of like levels of zinc and levels of oxygen, and because we actually are able to blend Islander, like we have a little bit more control that way, whereas everything else is all single batches. Like we just have way more volume of Islander kicking around the brewery. Like at any one time, we typically have like, especially peak summer, we'll have at least 240 hex in bright tank, and then 2 to 3 conditioning tanks of the same volume behind it, and then the next batch ready to transfer into conditioning. So like we'll have
So you can
1,000
fine-tune
Yeah,
little
1,000 plus
recipes,
hectoliters.
and if it doesn't like completely hit spec, you can
blend out
accordingly.
and
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which is
That's
I really enjoy it.
Yeah. How do you track, like, let's say you were looking at your zinc levels. How do you go about, like, you have you can brew it a lot of times, which is nice, but how do you go about like tracking it? Because what I find is like, okay, I'm going to make a change 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, then I have like the result from that change or whatever, because it takes so long for these to happen. Like, how do you go about like tracking your changes, and how does that happen on your scale?
Yeah, we actually have, and I'll be transparent. It's nothing to do with me. It's a system they had in place before I came. But our taste panel program is pretty robust in the way that we taste, and we have it like set up to like trigger tasting of beer at certain times throughout its shelf life. And then when we're tasting things, we also have notes of like this batch, like anything that's unique to it, so that we're aware of changes that were made along the way. It's tough. Like I would say it's probably one of the things I miss the most about Stanley Park is like we had a lot more data. Like we had a full quality lab and a lot more lab equipment and capabilities. We also could lean on like the Labatts Tech Center to do additional testing for us, which was super cool because like getting actual zinc and yeast numbers is like mind blowing and like definitely not something that. Yeah, and
it's like, I don't know, I sprinkled this much in the cold stream.
Yeah, well, that's what I have to do, right? You just put your zinc in, and then you go, how did this ferment compared to the last time? It's the same.
It's crazy, too, because, like, I mean, I don't know how nerdy we are allowed to get on this podcast, but, like, when you actually send away and get numbers, like, I've always used, like, the water spreadsheets and stuff to figure stuff out, and you're like, man, when you actually send it away and get it tested, nothing sticks around. Like the mash swallows it all up, the trub swallows it all up. Everything just gets most of that stuff doesn't actually make it to fermenter, and you actually have to add way more than most books recommend when it comes to things like calcium and zinc, and two, way more than that again because most of it just gets trapped and doesn't even make it to the fermenter. So like really with zinc, the best way to add it, if you can, is to add it in line en route to the fermenter, but it's obviously tough to do that in a sanitary way.
Yeah, I was just going through this whole thing where, because last year we started adding zinc in line to fermenter, but we just added raw crystals.
Yeah.
And then I was like, doing some more reading. I'm like, everyone suggests obviously doing a solution that's been pasteurized, and then all of the information I was getting is like contradictory of the other on how to figure out what ppm and like what is appropriate for each. And eventually I was just, after asking a couple different people, they're just like, if what you're doing seems to be working, probably just stick with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's always like what's in the book and then what's actually like doable too on your scale and like what's possible. And balancing that is always the tough part. It's like, yes, it's best to do it this way, but on a production scale with multiple people doing it, maybe it's better we just throw it in the kettle.
Yeah.
Let some of it be lost to the trube. That's fine.
Yeah.
But like,
exactly.
It'll,
it's not expensive.
Some of it will make it through kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's fun. Yeah.
How is this, how's the Islander lager changed over time, or has it stayed fairly true, or can that not be divulged?
Oh, it can be divulged. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I guess I'm going to throw the question back on you for a second, or both of you, I guess. Like, where do you land on, like, recipes? Like, do you think they should stay the same, or do you think they should evolve?
They should definitely evolve, in my opinion, because my opinion is that people's taste palates evolve over time, and your consumer is evolving. Like, they're changing every year, because I'm changing every year, so is everyone else. And so you have to change your recipes to suit it. Like, basically, like, the adage for IPA is like, just throw in like 5% more hops every year and you'll be like kind of on keeping up
on trend.
Like
hop inflation.
Yeah, there's like that's basically it. Like if you go back and look at some of our old recipes that we were doing, like when I was at Yellow Dog, it's just so like way less hops, but everyone was.
Yeah.
And now it's just to keep up, you just have to add more and more and more.
I think too, like it's one of those important things. I mean, we all know, but it's one of those things. The more you know, you're like, oh wait, malt changes every single year. Like if I'm trying to, especially for you with silo fills, you're probably watching it a lot more closely. But if I'm trying to create the same Islander, even if it's down to exactly the same or trending with how things change, but still hitting those notes, you have to change so many different things here and there. Or whether it's, we made a switch substituting out Sots for Lebluski because the Sots year has been not consistent the past 2 years. And
Yeah.
So all this to say, we change things all the time. I mean, not that often, but like, I mean, Islanders evolved over the years for sure. And like, I've always been a believer in like, you have to adapt things to help them stay relevant. And, I think we've been lucky and challenged by the fact that like we have consumers that have become more and more educated as time's gone on too, and like have greater expectations of breweries. Like 10 years ago, you could open a brewery and make mediocre beer and get away with it, and now like you just can't. Like it's not a thing anymore. So like, and we've all, I mean, it's a cool industry in that way. I think we all force each other to raise the bar all the time, which I love. Like everyone's challenging everyone, and we can all see it in a positive way where we're all trying to get better. And so like Islander's gone through shifts over the years. Like I think the core of what it was supposed to be has always stayed the same, but there's been, I mean, I would say it's probably maybe the simplest it's ever been, which I like. I always start from nothing and then only add if I have to. That's like my philosophy to brewing. And I am notorious for constantly asking why things are in recipes and do they have to be there. Can we try taking it out? Can we see if anyone notices? Because I just like, to me, it's like, I think, when you're a home brewer, it's so easy. Like you go to the store and you tell them to put all the different things in the bag, and then you
throw it through the one coffee grinder.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just like, it's easy. Like it's not my problem. It's Chris Booth's problem. Like he's the one that's got to weigh it all out, not me. And then once you become professional, like it's not even just about you. It's also like you're, managing a team and,
consolidating orders and
you're cranking through 8 brews, and for my time at Turning Point, you're cranking through 8 brews in a day, and like every time I make the decision to add a specialty malt, that's one extra bag that a guy's got to dump into the mill versus what could have come from a silo. And like my mind was always like, I should justify that. Like if it's worth it, then it should be there and it's worth the effort. But if it's not doing anything, then why are we doing it? So I always challenge people on recipes, because I think it's easy to get into this like I'm some kind of like genius inside the matrix type vibe where you think
sort of
like
astrophysicist vibe.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're like wherever that meme is with all the calculations coming up, and I've always found it funny. There's been countless examples. Like Carapils is one that drives me insane. Like, just don't. Like I can't do it.
You're not a Carapils believer?
No.
Unbelievable.
No.
That's
I could tell you countless. I could tell you countless beers I pulled it out of and no one has noticed.
But the head retention.
Yeah.
You're rocking my world.
So go ahead.
I think like if any of the owners are listening from our breweries, we don't change the recipes at all. They're all the same. But I think it is. I think we all agree that like, or maybe we don't, but I think at least for me, you have like an idea of what that brand is or what that SKU is. And so like any changes you're making are like only helping to like, make that beer better for that consumer, because like you're going to have you'll have the same consumers for some beers, but some people are only going to drink Islander. They're only going to drink your hazy IPA. And so you're just trying to make their experience better, whatever that is. Like if it's just like, I want this lager to be more drinkable and have less head, I guess, then then I'll just take out the carapils. But I'm just joking.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I always, something I've done for a long time, and now we do it BI. It's like start from a brand profile. Like, what is the beer supposed to be? Because I think sometimes I've seen this countless times, and sometimes it's fine. Like sometimes it was a good thing because your original idea was dumb, and where you ended up is better.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like too many times, like people set out to make something, and then they get something, and then they just run with what they got, and they're like, this is fine, like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I think really it's like the art of it all is like having a vision for where you want to get something and then getting it there, right? And I think you get better at getting closer the more you do it, but
sometimes it can be as simple as just like honing in the color, or like figuring out like I don't know, doing blind tastings has been like super helpful for myself and my team, and just like making sure that it's like, let's go through and let's taste all these beers and let's like really break them down. Like, don't even sip it until you've like made a gauge on which one you like the color profile of, and then which one do you like the head, the lacing, and like all of that, and then be like, okay, which one at the end, unveil which one is ours and where did it land, and how can we meet that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
like it's looking at it more objectively, I guess. It's just like fundamentally what you're trying to achieve, and did you actually achieve it is the fun of it.
Yeah. So with Hermannator, are you doing 120 hect batches?
Hermannator is actually a funny one because it's
is that
strong.
All pilot brews?
No, we do. So we brew. I think last year we brewed 2 brews, but we get about 140 hex finished volume.
Oh, wow.
So the crazy thing is, I mean, talk about recipes that have evolved with time, and it's I mean, it stayed true to what it is, but like one of the cool evolutions, I guess, of that beer is, and I think they might have even been doing it before it became cool, but it's actually double mashed, which I thought was pretty sweet. That they actually they don't double mash in the sense that they collect the first runnings and mash them with those.
No.
They actually collect the second runnings and use those. Just they were literally just doing it to bump efficiency. Like, I don't even think they were thinking of it in any other way other than that. So that's really neat. And then the beer, I mean, we're a month and a half from brewing it, because like we brew it in July and we genuinely leave it in tank for 2-3 months and keep it icy cold, and it's a super cool beer to watch it evolve over the period. And it's also cool because like it's like the most unpretentious traditional beer seasonal that I think I've ever seen, in the sense like they've just always done it the same way. And like we were talking when we were emailing back and forth a bit there about Dominion and how it's just an evolution of Herman's, but like it was always like they've always done it the same way. Like they take Herman's yeast and then, or Dominion yeast, and then they put it into there, and like they have to like line everything up so they've got so many lagers all ready to crop at the same time, just because they need this massive flux of lager yeast to get into Hermannator at the same time. And it's super cool, and it's just like a massive. The brew day is just like a monster. And
I mean, that's our Canadian celebrator, essentially. It's like and like you say, unpretentious. I think the first time I had Hermannator, I was like 20 maybe, over on the island visiting like some high school friends, and like it was one of their friends. I was like, oh, you got to try this. It's the highest alcohol beer, and it's in 6-packs. Like, it was like, I'm like, man, if I grew up like being a binge drinker, drinking that instead of Black Label Supreme, like I'd be a different person.
And it's
hopefully
cool.
For
like
the better.
It's great. Like we have like whenever it launches at the brewery, they do like a Nature Day celebration, and we always have like a bunch of vintages that we'll throw on tap. Like we save kegs every year so that we can put like a vertical on tap, and then
nice.
We'll release some like product that we held back from prior years just so that people can buy like different years and things like that. And I even have, like, I got to bring them home at some point, but we were raiding through archives and digging some stuff out, and like bottles that go back like
Way
years
back.
and years and years. Yeah, like they're all kind of kicking about there. And it's like, it's kind of cool because, like, obviously my experience of craft beer up until now has been all very like recent. Like, it's breweries
Yeah.
that have been around for 10 years. And then when you're like,
Yeah.
man, these guys have been doing this for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And like the same vibe, like, it's kind of cool. And like I mentioned, that guy, Mike, who's our quality manager, he's been around with us for 35 years. And it's cool to hear his stories because he started as a brewer originally. And like, it's cool to me that like it was still that same kind of industry even back then. Like, it still had that same vibe and
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really
feeling
sweet.
around it. Like, it's neat.
It's cool. Like, I was definitely one of my first beers, and I remember like reading, like, not one of my first beers, but like one of the first beers that when I was getting into craft beer, and you're just like consuming knowledge, right? And you're like reading about like Doppelbocks and Ice Box, and you're like, I wonder if anyone makes an Ice Bock that I can buy, and then like realizing that there's one like in your own province that is made, and like probably not really an Ice Bock, but you know, it's a big Bock
Yeah.
beer, and like, but it was always really cool to be like, oh, this is a very traditional style of beer that it's still made like the same quality every year.
Yeah.
Do you find that like you're just getting like the same throughput every year, or is it just like slowly like tailing off, or is there people like myself that'll get like a 6-pack every year?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably not in its heyday. I'm sure it's had bigger years, but I know for
Yeah.
like the last number of years, it's kind of like a steady eddy. Like, we put out the same volume every year and we sell through it. And yeah, the same customers come out and buy it.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things. It's like, you either make too much or you don't make enough. We teeter between making 3 brews and 2 brews, because when we make 3 brews, we end up with stuff still on the shelves in February. When we make 2 brews, we get angry calls from people telling us that we didn't make enough, and you're like, there's no right answer here.
Yeah. No. If you solve that problem, let me know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just every time the thing I've learned over the years is, if you ever say to yourself, do you think we should make one more batch? The answer is always no.
Yeah.
Always no.
Everyone's already bought it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
If you're
don't need
asking
it
yourself
again.
now, it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah. That's 100% true. How do you go about a question for you? How do you go about, like, you know, you got a old school German brew house that makes 120 hect beer. How do you go making hazy IPA that like looks like this and stays hazy? What's your secrets? Is there something that you've learned?
Yeah,
How many clear batches have you put out?
Just a quick shout out. The like Mystic Haze, the pale ale. As soon as I poured that into my glass, I was like, whoa, the aroma's filling the room. Like,
yeah,
it's
a
great.
cool beer.
Yeah, this is the hazy, the Broken Islands, and it's like yellow and hazy, which is always nice.
I mean, honestly, I don't know. Hazy, the whole thing is a mess, let's face it, right? We all got into this, and we couldn't make beer that was clear, and that was the problem, and we were trying to figure that out, and then that just as I feel like we'd really gotten somewhere with making clear beer, nobody wanted that anymore, so then it was like, okay, well, flip it on its head. And it's funny because I've had like different experiences of what works and what doesn't work. And I find anyone I ask, everyone has different opinions on what works and doesn't
100%.
work
Yeah.
with haze stability. So I can give you an answer. And actually, even these 2 beers aren't the same. And that blows my mind. And the way they stay hazy is not the same. So like the Mystic Haze, this one puzzles me because this one we do very little to like keep it hazy. Like we make it and that's it. Like it has wheat in it, it has oats in it. It's 4.5%, so less base malt.
Yeah.
And
with an English yeast or
like London Ale 3 essentially. And then it's got very little in the way of whirlpool hopping, and then a fairly heavy dry hop. And then we've never had issues with haze on it. And then Broken is a beer that over the years we've had periodic issues with batches dropping clear. And and we put a whole lot of effort in the last year into getting that fixed, and we haven't touched wood, although everything's IKEA around here, so I guess I have no wood.
Touch veneer.
Touch veneer. We put a whole bunch of work into it, and the funny thing is now, like where the recipe for Broken is now, the protein portion is the same as Mystic. There's just more base malt in there to bump the alcohol.
Yeah.
And we have biohaze in there. That's what we use for haze stability. We add it at the same time as the dry hop.
Yeah.
And it works great. The problem is, I think we made a lot of changes around the same time, and there's part of me that wonders if I still need the biohaze.
Yeah.
I probably don't, because it works on Mystic.
Yeah.
But then Broken has been in such a good spot recently, so we've just started the process of walking the biohaze down.
Yeah.
To eventually eliminate it. But that was before I started. They'd gone to biohaze because they were having so many issues, but then it wasn't necessarily helping. And then, through process, we've got it to a point now where it's consistently hazy, but the biohaze is still in there.
Yeah.
And we're slowly walking it out. But I always find it funny to talk about hazies, and like it's funny because I just feel like nobody has a consistent answer. Like a lot of my theories revolve around, I think timing of dry hop is important for sure. But then it's tricky because as the amount of dry hop beer in your portfolio has grown, yeast crops, so.
No, it's like, it all depends on how much like protein you're adding, what yeast you're using. And like, even those two variables can be totally different if you're using like a Vermont base strain versus like a London Ale 3 strain. The amount of protein that you want is going to be different for those. And like, so you talk to someone that uses one yeast and like, oh, you should do this. And like, don't do that, because like they're not the same. So I found like, you're right. Like in my experience too, it's like, you have to kind of find out what works best for you. Yeah. And that's basically it, because nothing really translates. There's too many variables of water, like minerals, protein. What kind of protein are they? Like big proteins or small like peptide proteins? Like,
well, and you want to, we were talking about scaling earlier. Scaling hazy IPAs is actually some of the hardest things we dealt with at Stanley Park, because our big brew house had a wet mill, which wet mills had a whole other dynamic, because the minute the grain gets crushed, it's basically mashing, because it's already at mash conversion temperature and it's hydrated. And then it takes you 40 minutes to mill. So at that point, it's basically converted. So
start running off.
Yeah, and then like, because you're mixing it the whole time, like you're degrading proteins, and you're like the whole dynamic of that brew house is just so different to what we were doing at the brew pub.
Would it be
so
like high pressure steam with the calandria as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Was that changes at all? Yeah.
Yeah, so like it was just, you were dealing with such, to your point, like there's so many like little nuances in there of like what works with different strains and different methods and all the rest of it. So it was like, we found a method that worked great at the brew pub and was stable, but the minute we scaled it, it was like, it didn't work at all.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, now we gotta go back to the start a little bit, which is hard to go back
juicy
to the
West
start.
Coast.
Yeah, well, and then it's hard to go back to the start when you're doing 100 hect batches, and like it's a new brand, because you don't necessarily have the frequency there to keep going. And I feel like it's an interesting one. I think we're in a good spot stability wise now, and we centrifuge, which I like. Like there's several things I call truth machines, and centrifuges are one of them. It's like, at the end of the day, if it drops clear in your centrifuge, it was going to happen eventually anyway.
Yeah.
So we're lucky that we centrifuge and have a good idea of haze stability kind of early on in that sense. And if it's going to drop clear, I'd rather it happened on my watch than in someone's can, and then they're getting slugs and all the rest of it. So
no, centrifuging hazies is, in my experience, the best, because you can just it takes all the harshness out. Everyone's like, oh, you know how like a good hazy IPA should taste better after a week? It's like, well, if you centrifuge, it tastes great.
Yeah, right, gets rid of that hop burn right away.
The hop burn is like, it's all there. It's all tied to yeast. It's like, if you've ever like drank yeast before, like, or had like tasted yeast, it's extremely bitter.
Yeah,
That's what it is.
Isoalpha acids love to cling to it.
Yeah, so it's like you just zip that out, and it's like fantastic.
Yeah, forbidden ice cream. Yeah. So what are the hops you're using in Mystic Haze? Because it's got like this nice stone fruit, like
Yeah, so it's a blend.
Wood.
It's kind of like that Neo Mexicana vibe, I guess. So it's got Comet, Eldorado, and Talus.
Nice.
So
Comet's a hop I haven't used, but that's seems on the up and up as far as underappreciated hops.
I love Comet. I've loved it for a long time. That was one of mine and Blair's first shared loves was Comet.
Is it the astrophysicist in you, or?
I guess
Yeah,
so.
right.
Blair, I don't know if you remember it, but when we were early days of Bomber, we had a beer called Absolute Horizon, and it was all of the space-themed hops. So it had like Comet, Apollo, Galaxy.
Eclipse probably wasn't out then, but
no, it wasn't.
Perfect.
Yeah, Eclipse wouldn't have been out then, but yeah, that would have been ideal. That would have got added into the mix for sure. And then it was the we want to get sued label, so they'd put like a bunch of things that were definitely copyrighted on it. Like there was a TARDIS on there, and like Star Wars references and all the rest of it. And we never did get sued. The time we got sued was when we did a beer called East Van Smash, or we didn't get sued, we got cease and desist, and we had a hop bursting through the label, kind of like the Kool-Aid guy.
Oh,
they told us to stop. They weren't happy, but
they're on
TARDISes on labels, that's fine.
They're happy for the exposure in Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we could use some more viewership.
Breaking into new markets.
Yeah. For the Comet, are you using like BC Comet or like Comet from the States? So I know you can get some good Comet here too.
There is good Comet here for sure. I think, we're still on US Comet because we have a contract.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't be against using BC Comet. I've definitely had some really nice BC Comet.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those hops that works well here. I think I don't know why, but I've had some good samples.
It's a public variety, so anyone can grow it. So it's easy to get a hold of.
Yeah.
So yeah, with in winding down, I guess, like what excites you about the BC brewing industry these days, and like where do you think we as an industry can improve?
I don't know. Everyone throws around that word maturity a lot right now in craft beer. I think we're evolving. I think, the thing I've always loved, like I actually sit on the BC Craft Brewers Guild now, and through that get to hear a lot of stories and see a lot of what's going on. And like, I think the resilience of this industry is great. Like, I think it's cool to me that like a lot of the people I met 10 years ago are still in it now and still passionate. And I think like, even though we're going through a challenging time as an industry, like I think ultimately, like, because we have this core central, like, we want to make a good product and we want to make great beer, like I feel like we're riding it as best you can in that situation because the passion's still there. And I think it's been great to see the resilience of the industry, considering everything that's happened in the last 4 years. Like, it's just been one thing after another that was just hammering us and making it very difficult to get product out there. So I think the resilience excites me, and I'm excited to see how the market changes and where it goes. Like, I think the way it was in the past, where I feel like the market was very much led by new and interesting all the time, I think has kind of waned a little bit from my perspective. I don't know if that's the same at smaller scale, but I'm definitely seeing like people are gravitating more towards cores and kind of beers they can rely on, which I think for us as brewers, I actually find it more exciting. Like, I used to love brewing 20 batches back to back of something I worked on over brewing 20 different new things, because 20 different new things,
totally.
I never learned anything. I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah. And every time you're like, I could have done it better.
Yeah. So then when you're like, actually, no, I'm just, and that's like when I said with the brew pub batches earlier, like when we were developing recipes there through the peak of summer, it was great because you could iterate on something like 12, 15 times and then really take it in one direction, take it in another direction, find where it wanted to be. And I think the cool thing is, like, as the industry moves towards more of that, I think all of our cores are going to become a lot better beers and tastier beers. And I think overall the quality bar is going to rise, because it's really hard to get good at something when you're throwing darts all over the place. Whereas when you really start to hone in on one thing and truly understand how to make certain beers, like I think overall it will be elevated. It's cool.
Totally. Yeah. It's really nice to like hone in a recipe and like, you get to a point where you're like, man, this is exactly where I want it. And, maybe it's taken 20, 30, 40 times, but like,
yeah. And you can just order a pint and enjoy it. Like, that's a novel concept.
Yeah.
And not just be like, ah.
Yeah. Should I try this out?
You brought up earlier, like in 2014, 2015, you could just like kind of fart out anything. People are going to go for it. Now it's like, that's not the case anymore.
No.
Like, people have to be interested on the menu. They have to be already interested at that point. So it's like, you have to be able to deliver what that beer is like promising on the menu. And then when you can do that, I think that's exciting. Like, that's for me, like, oh, if I put out a new beer, it's always like, okay, how does it go well? And I talk to the front of house, like, how is this going over? Because
like, if people order second pints, that's always like, I've said it so many times. I said it all the time at the brew pub. I'm like, we're in the business of making 6-pack beers. Like, I want beers that people want to drink a 6-pack of. I'm like, and we actually had like, we had fancy flow meters on the tap, so you could actually see data, and it would tell you like how much beer was being poured as flights, how much was being poured as pints, sleeves, and all the rest of it. And I would always watch it, and I'd be like, oh, that beer is just a flight beer, and that's great. Like, I mean, it serves a purpose in a brew pub environment, but that's not a beer that you should put into market, because it's just it's the kind of thing people are going to drink it and be like, oh, that's cool, and never touch it again. And like, I don't want that. Like, that's not really it's never really been what I'm about as a brewer. I like making, I mean, I guess maybe it's a little bit my background of coming from the UK, where it's all about session beers and beers that you can, drink 3 or 4 of, and like, Mystic's a great example of that, where it's like 4.5%. It's not overly bitter. It's got good flavor to it. Like, it's a great session beer. It's a great 6-pack beer. Yeah. In our case, 8-pack beer now. So it's definitely kind of I would say my prerogative is kind of that direction.
Yeah. When are you going to come out with the Canadian suitcase of it?
That's 24. That's a 24 pack.
I'm laughing because we talk about it all the time. It's like, man, when is the BC market going to be ready for 2-4s? Because it's crazy. Like, our sister brewery is Muskoka, and you go out there, and like 2-4s in Ontario are like the most normal thing ever. They do 2-4s with 473 ml cans.
Yeah,
they're like $80.
We were just talking about this with an Ontario brewer. It's like May long weekend out there is called May 2-4.
Yeah,
that's what you got. You get a 24 pack of beer. And
I remember
that's your weekend.
I went to visit Muskoka, and then after we were sat in the tap room having a beer, and I'm watching like people come through the door, and everything from like a young guy with a skateboard to like an old guy with his wife, just like coming in, grabbing a suitcase of beer and leaving. Like, it was just. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, you just wouldn't get this. I mean, maybe you would. We've never tried. Maybe we should.
2-4s of craft. That's hell yeah.
I mean, it's creeped there, right? Like, we went to 12s. We've dipped our toes into 15s now. Like, I mean, who knows?
Well, you're in lucky lager territory there. It's a 15-pack, lucky lager 15-pack. It's the Vancouver Island way.
Yeah.
For reasons beyond comprehension, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. For anybody new who's trying to get it in the industry, do you got any words of wisdom for them? I mean, go interview it in Shendio.
Yeah, go. I don't know. I mean, I always feel like I'm a bad example probably of how to do it right. I don't know. I think I've really enjoyed how the industry has changed with time, and as someone who did eventually go and do my brewing education, not that I think it's essential. Like, I think there's lots of ways to skin a cat, but like, I think really it's like, you've got to immerse yourself in it. You've got to, I think the bar is so high now that like, you really have to level up your knowledge, and be that through your own study and reading. Like, the thing I mean, there's so many great brewing books and textbooks and literature, like through the MBAA, and even like going to do the IBD diploma, for example, is not that expensive in the grand scheme of of education, but I think like I think having that knowledge is really important, and having the passion, because it's a tough industry for sure. Like it's not, nobody's getting rich here. It's it's something
for
you
the
have to
love.
enjoy, and
Yeah.
but then at the same time, like monetarily you might not be getting rich, but at the same time, like the people in the industry is like so unique compared to any other industry. Like I can't imagine people that work at toilet paper factories have the same camaraderie. Like I could be wrong, but I'm
You
pretty
don't
sure.
subscribe to that podcast?
No, I don't. Well, it's funny though, because like, so I mean, where I used to live in New West, and obviously there's the Kruger plant there, and I knew someone. I curled with a lady who used to be in the finance department at the Kruger factory, and I jokingly said one time, I'm like, well, in beer, like we get a lot of free beer. Did you get free toilet paper? She's like, yeah, every long weekend we would get to pull our cars around back, and they load you up with toilet paper. And I'm like, oh, that's great. So then
That's
I think,
hilarious.
like, I mean, I guess my general career advice is think about what you consume most of, and then try and get a job in that industry, because they
It's all
probably
about
give it to you for free.
Yeah. That's good. I like that advice.
Yeah, that's hilarious. One of the books I brought back from Scotland when I was traveling there was the Illustrated History of Curling, actually, because I figured it'd be great to have a history of curling that's outside of Canada.
It's a fun sport, and then it's always funny because I never curled in Scotland. I started curling here. I actually got into curling because of brewing. Like it was the Brewers Bonspiel at Persephone was the first time I curled, and then kind of just got into it through that. So, but a lot of the people I curled with could not understand the concept that I'd never curled when I came from Scotland. I'm like, it's really not that big a deal in Scotland. Like, it's not like here where like every small town in Canada has a curling rink. Like it's so normal here. Whereas I looked it up because I was being ridiculed one night. I'm like, the closest curling rink to where I grew up was 4 hours away. So like, of course I didn't curl.
No. Oh yeah, it's like the more remote of a place you have, the more likely it is to have a curling rink in Canada. It's like for sure. Yeah, I started curling this year, and all the most of the people that we are curling with in our league are at least 35 years older than me, and are from somewhere in Saskatchewan or Alberta, just like small town, or Manitoba. They're like, yeah, we've been curling here for my entire life. It's like, I believe it. You're very good.
It's great. It's fun.
Have you guys listened to Broomgate?
No.
So podcast I heard about on CBC about a new broom that swept the nation.
Wow. I only curl for the beer, so that's basically it.
Yeah, I curl in the winter and I golf in the summer because they're both great drinking sports. So
there you go. Yeah. I guess that kind of leads us into our next question, which is what takes you up your time outside of brewing?
Most recently, having a child, that definitely will take huge chunks of your time. Which is great. And then actually like the last year and a half, I really got into running, which I feel like is this like classic brewer thing. Like, I don't know, you get old as a brewer and then you just take up running because it feels like a thing you should do.
It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I'm still off of that, but I see.
Take your word for it.
I see other people for sure.
But yeah, I started running.
It's hard on your joints.
It is hard on your joints. Yeah, I don't know. A year and a half ago, I decided, do you know actually what did it to me is I went home in October of like the year, our daughter was born in December, and we went home for a month in the October. I took pat leave and we went home and saw family and all the rest of it. And my parents have gotten really into running, and they're both in their, I guess they're in their 60s. Yeah, like early 60s. And they were like, you should come for a run. And I'm like, I haven't ran in years. Like, just come. And so I went, and then like my dad is doing rings around me. I'm like, this is not good. Like, he's 30 years older than me, and look at him go. Like, this is embarrassing. So then I think like just my competitive nature initially was just like, I can't not be faster than my dad. That's not good.
Yeah.
And then I ended up getting really into it, and I actually just ran my first marathon in Vancouver like a month ago or whenever that was. So
congrats.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Nice.
It's coming. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I could probably use it actually.
Yeah.
But I'm in kid mode right now, so that's
How many kids do you have?
3 now.
Oh, right. You're truly in the weeds then.
I have a 1-month-old right now.
Yeah, I was
so
gonna say.
these are bags for a reason here, for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah.
We're like 90% sure we're in the one and done camp because just we love our daughter, but I don't know if I could go through the baby phase again. I commend anyone that does 2 kids and 3 kids. You deserve a medal. That's a lot of work.
I don't know, or yeah. You just get used to it. It's already you're already busy, is what I always say. So
yeah.
like I'm not gonna get more busy, am I?
You don't need to make plans. You already have plans.
Yeah, it's already done. We're already at the soccer field, so the youngest one can run around the soccer field. That's fine. Yeah.
If you want something done, give it to a busy person, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. Sweet. Yeah. Thanks for doing this, Tom. This has been great. Very fun.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to talk about beer. So I don't get to do it. Don't get to do it so much anymore. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure. For us that's part of the reason we put this all together. Shoot the shit.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why This Beer. This has been our chat with Thom Riley from Vancouver Island Brewing. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Follow us on social media for the latest updates, and stay tuned for more conversations with the people behind the beers that you love. And until next time, cheers.